Hello, my name is Norma Anderson. I first heard about Raoul Wallenberg in a tribute to him in New York City on March 14, 1985. It was the most elegant affair I had ever attended, held at the Sheraton Center Hotel with more than 1,100 people present. After returning to Jamestown, the memory of what he had accomplished in a short period of time and the thought of his unjust imprisonment by the Soviet Union would not let me rest until I had formed a Wallenberg committee to work for his freedom. The goals of the Wallenberg Committee of the Jamestown area are those of all the other Wallenberg committees. 1. To work for the release of Raoul Wallenberg. 2. To educate the public about his achievements. And 3. To perpetuate his memory. The person sitting here with me is Mrs. Susan Serena Tabor. She has come to Jamestown, New York in the United States of America to speak about her experiences in Budapest during World War II. Mrs. Tabor lives and works in New York City. She has been a librarian at Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Institute of Religion, for 36 years and is now semi-retired. However, she continues to educate the public about this 20th century hero, Raoul Wallenberg. Susan, give us some information, some background information about the development of the relationship between the nation of Hungary and the Jewish people.
The Hungarians, known at all times like the Magyar tribes, come and are related with the Finn-Ugor language family. And they are related with the Lapps, the Voguls, the Osztyak, and the Cheremis. They were nomad people. They left the Ural Mountains, and on their wanderings, they came southwest. And at one point, they got in contact with the Khazar tribes, who had quite an advanced kingdom in northern Balkan, Bulgaria, what is now Bulgaria and that part. The Khazars are known that the king of the Khazars converted to Judaism. And they had the Jewish laws, and they considered themselves Jewish, and they even invited Ibn Shaprut, who was a Spanish Jewish scholar, and he had the king had correspondence with him. The Hungarian also learned, the Magyars learned their agriculture and tanning of the skin. So they were almost ready to settle down. In 1884, they reached the fertile land between the Danube and Tisza. And Arpad, their leader, said, "This is the land that we are going to settle." Jews were already in this land in the part called Pannonia by the Romans. The Jews came with the Romans. So actually, you could say Jews were there first, but they did not have any rights.
Susan, could I interrupt? Did you say 864?
884.
Okay, 884.
Did I say something?
I just wanted to make sure of the date.
In the 10th century, they elected their first king, István, Etienne, who became Catholic, and he asked and received a crown from the Pope. And he converted the Hungarians to Christianity. There was, as always, some people who were for the Jews. The kings gave them some privileges, not recognized them. They didn't give them civil rights. but they recognized them because they were the tax collectors, the financiers. But when they owed them too much money, they simply expelled them from the country. Béla I, King of Hungary, gave quite some privileges to the Jews, but then came the restriction of the Church Council against the Jews. In 1495 was the first blood libel against the Jews in Hungary. In 1526, the Ottoman Empire came to Hungary. The Turks occupied Hungary. The occupation lasted for 150 years. I must say the Jews, according to records, had quite easier time than they had with the Hungarians. But then the Crusaders and the Germans came and expelled the Turks from Hungary, and that's when in a few years the Habsburgs, who were the Kaisers of Austria, became the King of Hungary. Hungary is supposed to be independent from Austria. It was just a personal union by the king, but that was not quite the thing. Well, there is in the Hungarian history always a lot of contradictions. The leaders of the Hungary, the aristocracy, didn't even speak Hungarian. They spoke German, French, they lived in Vienna. They had big estates which was worked by their slaves, the serfs, and they lived well from the land. Some of the aristocracy was good to the Jews, like Count Esterházy on his estate, because the Jews were good mathematicians and they knew a lot about forestry. So they had there a haven. Count Bethlen from Transylvania, he gave the Jews almost civil rights, acceptance. In Transylvania, when Reformation came, there was quite many who became Lutherans and became to the Reformed churches. Then the Catholic Church prohibited to belong to a Lutheran church or any Reformed church, and they did not allow them to continue their religious beliefs. So a lot of them became the so-called Sabbatarian, who, to keep their religion, they became Jews. It's very strange. And we still have names like Gidali, which is an ancient Transylvanian non-Jewish name. But the family Gidali is Jewish. As a matter of fact, I have a friend who is Gidali. So in Transylvania, Jews did not fare too badly. Well, we have to make here, I think, a bigger jump because we can get all involved. In the beginning of 19th century, liberalism became more spread in the world, partly America, partly the French Revolution. Nationalistic feelings were aroused. Hungarians became more aware of their Hungarian heritage. some of the aristocracy moved back to Hungary, to their estates, and became Hungarian. They tried to have the Hungarian language, culture build up. As a matter of fact, here is again a new little thing about Hungary. Even so, they started to learn Hungarian, but I think this was the only country where in the houses, the upper house and the lower house of the Hungarian government, they still spoke Latin.
That's
such an anomaly. I mean, that's Hungary for you.
Yes. You didn't mention the freeing of the serfs or the granting of some civil rights to the Jewish people.
Yes, that's right. In 1848, when under the liberal ideas, the Hungarians revolted against Austria. And it was a concerted effort of the whole nation, the poets, the writers, the intellectual people of Hungary started it. But it was also followed by the peasants and everybody else. Jews took part with great enthusiasm because they were hoping for civil rights, for being recognized as Hungarians. Unfortunately, the revolt ended in defeat and came a terrible, punitive era. But the Hungarians started to again organize, and the spirit of the world was such that the Habsburg couldn't keep it up. And that is when, 1867, there was a reconciliation between the Hungarian nation and their king. That was the time when Jews also made great progress. They got their the Serbs were saved, Jews were liberated, mm-hmm. The Jews got their civil rights, and even the Jewish religion was accepted as a religion. They could practice Judaism. So the Jews became very enthusiastically Hungarian. They took part in every part of Hungarian life, culture, the free professions, every part. They were the ones who built up industry in this agrarian country, which was needed very badly. This went to the First World War. In the First World War, 10,000 Jews died. In 1919, a communist regime took over Hungary. The two leaders who almost stand out in our mind is a count whose name suddenly, oh God, it came to my mind, Count Károly, and Béla Kun, who was a Jew, and Rákosi, who was a Jew, were the leaders in the communist regime. But the Habsburgs tried to fight it. They called in Romanian troops, and the communist regime was ended. And Admiral Horthy, who really hardly spoke Hungarian, Hungary was a kingdom. Admiral Horthy became a governor. And he was an admiral, and Hungary didn't have a sea.
That's right. Did it have a navy?
Well, 10 boats on the Danube. Well, he was an admiral in the Hungarian Empire. So that's how well, he was the leader of the so-called White Terror. The Reds, the Communists, and came the White Terror. Within 6 months, they killed 3,000 Jews. If they were communists or they weren't communists, they just hanged them. But then once Horthy was governor of Hungary, he calmed down and he became more law-abiding. In 1920, the first numerus clausus in the whole world was introduced.
What is a numerus clausus?
It's really a quota system. That many Jews, and it applied only to Jews. Jews would be allowed to enter the university. Like my husband had to go. Because Jews who was so difficult to get in, they couldn't risk it. Yeah. No matter what, they knew that this is it, but they couldn't.
So even if they thought that was the day they might be beaten up?
Yes, some of their friends told them. I mean, you see, I always told you there was always some who did not approve these methods. And there were some who, of course, did this, organized all this. From 1921 to 1931, another Count Bethlen, the same family, was the prime minister. You couldn't call him a real liberal, but he tried to run a modern state.
What was his last name?
Bethlen, B-E-T-H-L-E-N, Count Bethlen. And he became, and he was, later on also Horthy's trusted advisor. And he, later on you will see that he tried to advise Horthy not to go on with the Germans. But after Bethlen became the right-wing elements came in power. Gyula Gömbös, Bárci. In 1938, the first laws against Jews were introduced. Only 20% could be employed in a firm or in the professions. In this 20%, they did not go as far at that moment as the Nuremberg laws. Those were only considered Jews who became apostate, who became converted after 1919. They became Jews. Well, I continue with this and then I would like to return to something else. In 1939, the second Jewish law was introduced, and only 5% by this time Jews could be employed, earn a living. So their political rights were taken from them.
Yes.
Voting and everything else. Now, but I wanted to, I don't even know what. And then they already started the Nuremberg laws.
I have never heard of the Nuremberg laws.
Oh, you had to have 3 grandparents to be considered Aryan. That was the, right? Am I right?
3 Aryan
grandparents
to be considered
Aryan.
If you had 2 grandparents who were Jewish, you were
Jewish.
you were Jewish.
Well, then that saved Hitler.
Yeah,
Because-
that's the Hitler's rule. That's the Nuremberg law.
Because Hitler, it's possible that he had one Jewish grandparent.
It's, yes.
So he made it 3 out of 4, and then that protected him.
But many in Hungary discovered, when they really looked into their backgrounds, that they had a Jewish grandparent that they didn't expect, and one of them fainted on the floor of the parliament when this was brought out.
Yes.
I believe he subsequently committed
Suicide. A lot of those people committed suicide. Suddenly they belonged to this lovely people.
All people on the earth.
The scum of this, yeah.
They were.
Now, just to go back how statistics are not true. They are lying. And they are impossible actually to follow. Because there were some certain number of Hungarians. Now, they became more when the Nuremberg law came. But when the Germans marched into Czechoslovakia, Hungary marched in, they gave Hungary Slovakia, a small part of Slovakia back. But then Hungary got Jews from there, you see? Mm-hmm. So there were more Jews in Hungary than they were before. The same thing happened in Transylvania. When they got back a part of Transylvania, Jews came in. So you really don't know how many Jews lived. So when they ask me how many Jews were saved, it's almost impossible to say. Maybe Professor Braham or Eleanor would know, who make very, very thorough research. But the really true numbers are almost impossible, because Jews came from Poland.
Sure.
Because Hungary had a non-aggression pact from Poland. And that's when Count Teleki committed suicide, who was the prime minister at that moment. Because he signed this pact, and when the German army marched against Poland, he felt that the Hungarians should go and help the Polish people. But Horthy wouldn't hear from it, and the army wouldn't hear of it. So these are those very doubtful and difficult numbers to get together.
Susan, in your opinion, why were the Nazis successful in exterminating so many people in such a relatively short period of time?
Well, I personally would put it that they had by this time a great experience doing it. They did not have now to set up the crematorias. It was all worked out. Number two, the Hungarians cooperated. The Hungarian gendarmes very willingly cooperated with them. Now, you must know that Eichmann, who was sent in, he was an SS colonel, he was sent in from with the Germans 2 days later, when the Germans came in, to Hungary, which was in 1944, March 19th, to do just that. Now, Eichmann and Hess, who was the SS general, who was the commandant in Auschwitz, when the idea came that we have to exterminate the Jews, but fast, Hess and Eichmann were the two who decided to build the gas chambers and use cyclone gas made by I.G. Farben, which had a plant right outside Auschwitz. So Eichmann and Hess, who was not commandant from 1943 till 1944 June, was sent back to Auschwitz. he became the commandant. In between, he was in Hungary for a few days to discuss with Eichmann the stratagem. So it was very easy.
All right. And then the other part of that question